Let's return to our top story, these Iranian airstrikes on US targets in Baghdad and all the various ramifications out of them. Joining me now is Professor John Blaxland, Professor of International Security and Intelligence Studies at ANU. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me on the program, Tom.
So where we're at right now, the US assassination, this Iranian general, the retaliation from Iran, the analysis we've had today is this looked targeted not to cause casualties, not to ratchet things up too much. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And the way it was explained in the tweet, calling on the UN conventions, articles to justify their action, and the US president's response also on the Twitter, basically speaking very positively about what's happened, speaks to me about an approach that the United States president has been taking for a while now. He's been full of bluster, but his actions have actually not been that significant in terms of ramping up any kind of military action in the Middle East. What we've seen consistently now for a while now is the president's been looking to extricate the United States out of the Middle East.
Which he spoke about. It was an election pledge as well.
Absolutely. And so he's done that with the Kurds in Syria. He's doing it in Iraq. He held back on the bombings in the Strait of Hormuz late last year.
Around the drone
and objected to Bolton's advice. Bolton's been removed and replaced. He's been taking a position that looks much more like, if he has a strategy, it looks like he's trying to be involved in offshore balancing, which is extricating the United States, involving other players to do the heavy lifting. But, you know, with an opportunity like getting Soleimani, he's clearly somebody who the United States has been looking out for some time. He is involved in the deaths of hundreds of American soldiers.
So just on that, is it fair to assume there were previous options for other presidents to do this and they didn't, wary of what might happen with Iran, and Donald Trump said, let's do it anyway? Is that an assumption?
It's possible. It's possible, but it's quite likely that this is the first opportunity that they've had to really have him in their crosshairs. And of course, the US presence in Iraq is quite significant, but this is something that would have required the president's blessing, and clearly he did bless this particular instance. It would have been one of those kind of options that was kept in reserve to present to the president if they felt it was going to be opportune. But the fact that he took that decision shocked a lot of people. I mean, it really was something that was going to upset the apple cart in terms of domestic Iraqi politics, and the momentum for reform that took the wind right out of it by basically giving Iran cause to push back on any pro-American sympathy in the Iraqi parliament, particularly from the Sunnis.
So an opportunity for them to whip up nationalistic fervour in the country. We've seen the extraordinary numbers around the ceremonies to mark his death, the funeral.
Yep.
Does this show genuine, overwhelming support? I mean, we always assume that people are strongly encouraged, should I say, to get out there and mark the occasion. But you think this tips the balance against any reform within Iran?
Oh, I meant the reform within Iraq.
Within Iraq, right?
Yeah, but also possibly within Iran as well. I mean, you know, we've seen significant pressure in Iraq for reform, and similarly in Iran. But America's actions against Soleimani does really make it more difficult for reformers who are naturally seen as being sympathetic to the West because they're looking for change within the regime in Iran. That really does make it much more difficult for them. So a lot of pundits out there are now saying this move has made it very difficult. And even though there's speculation, as you say, as you suggest, about people being forced to turn up to the funeral.
So more difficult for. So how do you balance that against getting a target that a lot of people in the West would have wanted to, which seems right now on the surface to have been achieved without necessarily escalating things? If Trump doesn't retaliate, he's got his man, and yet Iran were too scared themselves or wary to actually take out any US casualties in response when they could have.
They could have, that's right. They're being quite very calibrated in their response. They know that they can't afford to have the United States come down on them like a ton of bricks. They also don't want to give further justification for other Arab countries, Middle Eastern countries, to be more sympathetic towards the United States,
right.
And to be more willing to commit to contributing to America's actions against Iran.
So you talk about a whole lot of different things, including sanctions, obviously, and that opens up that aspect as well.
Absolutely. The sanctions have been hurting Iran, and this is another important aspect. Iraq is really important to Iran. So Iran's got a very delicate game to play in terms of keeping relations with Iraq on a level footing, and it can't afford to push too hard in case there's a really severe blowback from the Sunni side, from the Kurds and from the United States particularly, that might undermine their hold on power through their proxies.
Possible flare-ups in Iraq. Areas. Right. Yeah. In terms of your confidence of what Donald Trump's strategy is that he's always spoken about and actually acted, if you look at it, about de-escalating things in the Middle East, are you confident then that he's not going to come out with any retaliatory strikes? The retired colonel we spoke to said that he'll have people in his ears saying, yes, keep going, take revenge back. Yeah. Do you see much of a likelihood he will?
Look, I think he's more level-headed than his tweets would have us believe. And, you know, there's a lot of rhetoric out there about Trump being a madman. But his actions are actually, there seems to be quite a consistent pattern to it. And my sense is that much like he's rejected the advice of John Bolton in the past, he will reject the advice of the Hawks to go in hard. It's just not in America's interest in the grand scheme of things. We've got to remember that, you know, we've got elections in Taiwan happening. We've got great power contestation happening in the South China Sea. Indonesia's just been pushing back on China in the Tuna Sea, on the edges of the South China Sea. The United States has bigger fish to fry than just dealing with trying to take on another headache in Iran. Remembering, of course, Iran, and American strategists know this, Iran is a lot bigger than Iraq. And it's a lot more cohesive than Iraq. So pushing too hard against Iran is likely to generate more of a blowback than it is to generate sympathy. And the United States wants Iran to be more softer. It wants to encourage reform. It wants to encourage an overthrow of the Ayatollah. But that's not going to happen if they give the Ayatollah ammunition against reform.
Yeah, the martyrdom perhaps supplied. Finally on this, if we did see retaliation from Donald Trump, do you think Australia might consider decoupling, at least in terms of Iraq? We've got the indication we've been told here at Sky News is we'll sort of follow what the US does around troop withdrawals, but if Donald Trump escalates and it puts our troops in serious peril, do you think we'd sort of be starting to write our own writing instructions?
Look, it's an interesting one. It's a nuance. Going to be a nuanced position if we get.
I wouldn't expect him to announce that.
No,
we're out. These guys are crazy. But
no. But the thing is, we're already committed. We've got ships and aircraft and troops on the ground in the Middle East. We've got hundreds in Iraq. We've got hundreds across other parts of the Middle East. We've got a variety of Air Force aircraft operating, 2 at the moment, I think, there, and a 3rd on the way, due to the commitments that we promised to help with the United States in the Straits of Hormuz. So were we to be approached by the United States, I could conceive the Prime Minister declaring that we are supportive of a position that doesn't actually commit more than we've already committed.
Well, appreciate your insights, John Blaxland. We'll wait and see what Donald Trump does. As we say that for a lot of different things these days, but you being a professor, you're normally on holidays at this time of year, so appreciate you coming in. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.